Welcome to another episode. We are at episode 42 of Experience Andy Weins Live as we go through this journey of growth and development together. This week, as always, we're going to start things off with a moment of gratitude. As I sat here today, I thought, what am I grateful for? And often I talk about the things I'm grateful for as far as people, and yet there's other things that I am grateful for in my life. And so today I want to focus on where I live. I'm grateful for my surroundings. I live out in the country, not too far from the city of Milwaukee, and yet in my area it's quite desolate. So I really appreciate that because this weekend we had a lot of thunderstorms, and I sat in my back porch watching the thunderstorms, or I sat in my garage watching the thunderstorms, and I like that. I like it nice and quiet. I like that I can look out and see, and it's quiet, and so I'm grateful for that. And so when I express this gratitude, sometimes it is a struggle for me to say, okay, what am I grateful for this week? And yet I can look back and as I think, no, there's some really good things I have going on in my life that I may not always focus on. And so I want you to focus on what are the things you're grateful for? Why do you live where you live? Where are the places you visit? The places you interact with? Really focus on what places make you best. Maybe it's going for a hike or playing around a golf. And then focus on that gratitude and then seek gratitude in new places, because think about what that provides you and where else you can get that provided to you. So that's the whole point of seeking gratitude, is to find more gratitude, right? Is to have that lens, look at the world, and then you'll more often see it when otherwise maybe you'll see the negative otherwise. All right. Second thing, order of business, podcasts. I've been pushing this last couple of weeks because I realized how much I love being on podcasts. So I have a couple of really good opportunities coming up here in the next couple of weeks being on podcasts because I've been advertising it here. So if you have a podcast or someone that has a podcast that you think I'd be a great guest on, would love an introduction, because I love going on podcasts and talk about how my goal in life is to change the world one word at a time. And so any of those introductions cost you nothing, and it gives great opportunity to myself, the host of a podcast, and also those guests, so that we can do some knowledge share together. I also know I host another podcast right after this one. I go live every week and do the Trash Talk Business Podcast. And I know how exciting it is when people come on and say, hey, this would be a really good guest for you. It takes a lot of that work out for you. And so it's always exciting there. All right, let's talk about struggles. So the reason I'm bringing this up now is I've spent the last 9 months or so, we're episode 42, right? So I spent the last 9 months plus here getting to this place where I've talked about, this is where I'm at. This is what I've learned. This is what I put in my book. This is what I've thought about. In the last couple of weeks, it was battle cries and best habits or best practices and life hacks and things like that. And some of the pushback I get often from people is they'll say, oh, that's great. I'm not there yet. I'm not where you are. I haven't put the work in yet. You got this all figured out. It's like bullshit. I wake up every day struggling in some capacity. And I acknowledge that struggle is part of life. That's what makes life worth living, doing things that are difficult and challenging and hard and frustrating. Like, that's the good stuff, right? Living a life without struggle that's boring and that's mundane, and we don't get better in that regard. And so I want to talk about the things I struggle with. And the goal here today is to open up and show how truly human I am, right? Because the more I talk about my struggles, the more I own them, the more I become the victor of my story versus the victim of my circumstance. And as I share struggles with you, one of two things is going to happen. Either you're going to say, oh yeah, I struggle with that too. And it's good to hear that there's a way to work through it. And the other part is, oh man, I don't struggle with that at all. So you know what? That feels pretty good that I don't put any thought into that I wake up every day and that's not a point of contention for me. So that's the goal of today, is to be really open and transparent with people, and also talk about the fact that it's on a continuum. And where you are in life and where you want to get and where you started, it's on this continuum. And comparing yourselves to others will get you nowhere. The comparison is the thief of joy. And I am guilty of hell. We'll just start right there. One of my areas that I struggle with is I compare myself to others. I compare myself to others and what they have, what they've achieved, where they got to at a certain age, right? I'm 40 now and say, oh man, where am I compared to other 40 years old? Like, I saw a stat yesterday that said every day in the United States, there are 7,500, not 7.5, 7,500 new millionaires every day. And I thought, what am I doing so wrong where I'm not one of them? Right? How have I not achieved that status? Look at all the things that I do and the work I do and the da-da-da-da. Well, that was a joy thief. I was doing perfectly fine in my day until I read that stat. It was a video I was watching, actually. It was talking about money. And I got down on myself for reading a stat that I didn't know before. And now all of a sudden I'm down on myself. And the second before I read it, I was agnostic towards that fact because I didn't know it. And now all of a sudden I was kicking myself, and now next day I'm still thinking about it. So one of the areas that I struggle with absolutely is in comparison. Another area I struggle, I talk about blame, excuse, denial, right? When you're not taking ownership, accountability, responsibility, which are all action coach ideology, right? Blame, excuse, denial is where we fall into. And in that regard, I am a blamer. Talked about it in the show in the past, and I struggle with that because it's simpler for me to say, look what this person did or did not do that was a contributing factor to this situation, versus what could I have done different, right? Where was my ownership? Where did I need to step up? I read this quote the other day. Oh, I want to see if I can find it with ease now that I'm saying this out loud. It's to the effect of conclusion is the place where you stop thinking about the problem, right? A conclusion, you're like, all right, I came to the conclusion. It was Sally's fault. Boom, done. That's the conclusion I came to. And actually, let's keep thinking about this. Let's dig a little bit deeper. Let's take some ownership here. Where's my DNA here? Where could I have impacted the overall mission success versus merely Monday morning quarterbacking it and then blaming somebody else? So there's another area I struggle. Fight, flight, or freeze. So the inverse of the creative, confident, clear brain, your big brain. The inverse of that is your lower limbic system, where you fight, flight, or freeze. I'm a flyer. I will be the first person when there's conflict or controversy. I walk away. No, not today. Not going to do it. And often it can be a good thing, and sometimes it ends up being detrimental because I walk away from situations that I know good and well I could have impacted in a positive way because I wanted to walk away. I'm typically not one that's going to freeze. I really cannot recall a time where I stood there and watched the thing go down. And I used to be much more of a fighter, where I felt like I had to get involved in every fight. I had a kind of a savior complex for sure. I used to have a savior complex. And then I heard a quote a couple of years ago about martyrs. Someone said it to me. They said, you know what happens with martyrs? And the truth is they always die. And that's my reality. So I got out of that fight mode. I was always up for a good scrap, right? Whether it was a verbal altercation back when I bartended and used to go to the bars, I was always good. I was always down for a physical altercation. Like if someone got stupid, I had no problem going hands-on with somebody. Like I enjoyed it. The adrenaline rush is interesting. I love breaking up bar fights when I was a bartender. And now more often than not, I walk away from situations, and it's healthy. Absolutely. In retrospect, I can look back and say, hey, this was a healthy time I did it. And I also know there's times in the moment I know that it's not healthy for me to walk away. I know that I need to lean into this thing. I need to engage with this thing. And often those times are the times where I'm having internal struggle and I walk away and I use it as I need time to think about it, or right. And as I step away from it, there's no new information that becomes available, no new facts, nothing significant happens. And merely I'm punting and I'm walking away from making a decision in a time where I know I need to make a decision. And that goes with really one of the areas I struggle with the most, which is my wounded inner child. I've done a lot of reading and understanding and research on wounded inner child and fulfilling the needs of the child you were, somewhere between 4 and 7, 5, 6, whatever they would call it, right? The needs that you had as a child, and what does that wounded inner child need? And then you crave that so bad it ends up being to your detriment. And my wounded inner child, and this came up a lot in my last relationship, and onus was on me, is this idea that I didn't feel good enough, that I would never live up to other people's expectations, and I would never live up to my own expectations, and always came back to feeling good enough for the company, good enough for the moment, good enough for the challenge I faced. And I know when I'm struggling the most, that's where I go. I'll question whether I'm good enough or not. Even now, right? I'm episode 42 into this Experience Andy Weins live thing. And I say, why am I doing this? Right? Am I good enough to put my ideas out there? And I remind myself what Jordan Peterson often talks about this. What advice would you give to someone that you loved? Remove yourself from this position. And what advice would you give to that person? And I think the advice I give to people all the time when it comes to creative passions or when it comes to new business adventures, I tell them the same thing. Do it 100 times, and then you have enough data to say whether or not it's working, whether or not it's good for you. So I'm 42 episodes into this, and it's okay. When I have these moments of, am I good enough? Are my ideas noteworthy enough? Right? Do I have enough thought leadership that is worthy of people's 15, 20 minutes of their week that they'll listen to me or read my blog? And I remind myself of what that advice I give to other people. It's do it 100 times. Let's not sit here and debate whether it's good enough at this point. Do it 100 times and let's see what the market says. And then I can lean into that comparison piece a little bit and think about the people that have put out hundreds and thousands of pieces of content to no avail. The Joe Rogans and Mr. Beasts of the world, Mel Robbins, their first piece of content didn't make them famous. Their 20th or 200th piece didn't make them famous, whatever it was. What made them famous is the word, made them impactful, influential. I'll say influential. It was consistency over time. Dave Portnoy, I watch his pizza reviews on Barstool. I love Barstool. I love everything about him, and yet he does pizza reviews. He's more known for pizza reviews than he is for 20 years of putting together a print publication on gambling and bars and things of that nature. He's more known for pizza reviews. Why? Because he puts out pizza reviews. 10 years ago, I'm going to start reviewing pizza, one bite. Everybody knows the rules. And he keeps putting the reviews out there. It's 3 to 5 minutes, and it's total mindless. And yet I consume that content. Why? Because it's consistent, and he's done thousands of them. And so now as I struggle through this, like, how do I work through those struggles? And now you guys are seeing in real time how I work through my struggles, right? I lean into it. I practice what Dr. Peterson says, right? What advice would you give somebody else that was struggling with this? And when you do that, it's so much simpler. I had a friend of mine earlier today call me, or she texted me, she's struggling because she's on the verge of leaving her current employer, and she knows that, and the employer doesn't know that. And now that she sees the light at the end of the tunnel, she's wanting to be more vocal about the things that have been frustrating her for years. And she's spinning, should I say this or should I say that? I stop it. Hold on. You're quitting, right? Yeah. Okay. So this problem all goes away pretty soon. Yeah. And within 5 minutes is, wow, it's so much more logical when you say it than me saying it in my head. Is, yeah, absolutely. Lean in on other people. Tell other people your story and then do this magical thing called shut the fuck up and listen to what they have to say, because they're not going to be emotionally tied. And then the next step is stop yourself when you're spiraling and say, hold on, what advice would I give someone I loved that's facing this? And then go off of that, because when you give that advice, they'll be like, yeah, that doesn't matter. All right, Andy, no one's watching your show. You got 3 watchers. Okay, who cares? You said you're going to do 100, right? You said you're going to do 100 of your other podcast, the Trash Talk Business Podcast, and I'm 115 episodes into that. I was going to shut that thing down a month ago, and I had listeners reaching out to me. I said, hey, I'm struggling to get guests. And now guests are coming out of the woodwork because I asked it of the universe, and now people are coming out. So yeah, I was struggling. I thought, yeah, it wasn't good enough. People don't want to listen. Maybe I'll just sunset this thing. I've closed a lot of businesses in the past that were failing or going to fail, or I didn't have the desire to continue running them. So it's, yeah, failing, closing a business, it doesn't bother me. It's like breaking up out of a bad relationship. Fine. And yet I don't want to break up out of a good relationship. And yeah, ask around, hey, is this a good use of my time? If you ask 100 people and 99 never heard of you, then okay, maybe it's time to sunset it. I asked 10 people, 8 of them gave me favorable perspective. And said, oh shit, all right, maybe we need to keep doing this thing. I had to be honest with myself first. Do I want to do it? And then I had to let the world know, hey, I'm struggling here, world. What are your thoughts? I value the perspective of people I ask for their perspective of, right? Opinions of those that have no interest in me and interest in my future, those opinions are like assholes. And yet perspectives of people that matter, that's important. I seek out those perspectives. And no, I'm not going to do what everyone says, right? That old adage, I gave you advice or I gave you a recommendation. You listen. It's like, that's a data point, right? Listen to what the market says. You got to be in a position to hear what those around you are saying. The best way to do that is ask very specific questions. Be so tight in your questions when you ask yourself or others that that answer will be able to tip the scale one way or the other. So for me, let's go back to this. I struggle with feeling good enough. So, okay, what's the expectation first? Maybe my expectation's way high. Maybe they're good with what I'm putting out there. And maybe it's not good enough and I got work to do. I know I have some keynotes coming up. I got a big one coming up in a month. It's a 4-hour keynote. It's not written yet. I have a month to get this thing right. So I can sit here and for 29 days, think about how not good enough I am. Or say, okay, maybe the keynote's not there yet. The keynote is not good enough yet. The workshop is not done. Okay. Now in reflection, right? I'm aware of the fact that I'm not where I need to be, right? And I have a month to get there. Okay. So now in regulation, what am I going to do to get there? What work do I need to put in? What research do I need to do? What time do I need to allocate? What does right look like? Begin with that goal. In EOS, we talk about rocks. I got the rock. What are the milestones? What are the things so that I can say, yeah, you know what? I'm not good enough today. And I'm okay with that. And I know by the time I need to be good enough, I'm going to be fucking great. And this is what I'm going to do to get there. So my advice to you is simple. First, in reflection. Always starts with reflections. Reflection, awareness, regulation. In that order, always. There's no shortcuts to that in life. Often people are doing a lot of reflection when they maybe when they're not aware of it. So in reflection, look back, right? What stopped you from being great today, yesterday, a week ago, a month ago? What stopped you from being great? What are these internal struggles you're having with? If you listen to what I talked about today, struggle-wise, it wasn't money, it wasn't time, it wasn't resources. No, these are all internal struggles. These are all things that are in my head. Because we know that thoughts reap an action. Actions reap a behavior. Behaviors reap a habit. Habits reap a destiny. Stephen Covey's told us that. And before all of that, words govern the thought. So in reflection, when you're talking about your struggles, where have you been great? Where were you not great? Look at the times you were great. Why? What did you do? How did you feel? How did you act? What did you tell yourself going into that situation? And then when you weren't as great as you wanted to be, when your strengths weren't peaking, what was stopping you? And it was stopping you. And it's not these external forces. What was stopping you internally? Take this opportunity to be the victor of your story. You can talk about your struggles and be a victor by saying, I struggle with this. And this is what I'm going to do about it so that I can live the life I want to live. Once you compartmentalize that and understand it, now you are aware of what those wounded inner children are telling you. You're aware of your predisposition on blame, excuse, denial, on fight or freeze. What are those predispositions that are preventing you from getting where you want to be in this world? Because this is a you exercise, not everybody else. Not what does the world can owe me? Nothing. The word deserve, that's one of those shit words I may add to the list someday. Oh, I didn't deserve this. I deserve bullshit. You get what you put into this world. So what can you do about it? You've done your reflection. You're aware. Now, this is where the money meets, or the rubber meets the road. What are you going to do about it? That's the regulation. Today, 15:30, like every single Monday, I showed up. That's what I did. I had a wounded inner child talking to me. Yesterday, I hadn't thought about what I'm going to talk about today. Earlier today, someone asked me what I was going to talk about, and I wasn't there yet. And when Taylor asked me what we're going to talk about today, I thought, I'm going to talk about my struggles. Because you know what? I can talk about that any day. Because the more I talk about it, the more I own it. The more I tell other people about it, the more willing people are to come to me to talk to me about how they have succeeded among their struggles. And the more willing people are to come to me and ask me for support with their struggles. And those are the conversations that I love. Those are the conversations that I get the opportunity to help or support changing the world on. So when regulation, what are you going to do about it? Take the time this week. Do some time to reflect. 15, 20 minutes. Write down some key times that you were great in the last week. Write down some key times you were not as great in the last week. Get to an understanding of how did you show up. Use the blame, excuse, denial tool. It's very simple. I guarantee you, you have a predisposition to one. Fight, flight, or freeze. I guarantee you, you got a predisposition to one. And I know you got a wounded inner child. That may take a little bit more work. Dig into that, because the more you aware you are, the more effective you can be in regulation. This week and always, let's do the same 3 things that make us great. Do the fucking thing. Tell the fucking world. And show the fuck up. We'll see you next week.